March is Women's History Month, and this is day 15 of talking about strong women, women you need to know. Today we'll be talking about Marion Mahony Griffin, born February 14th, 1871 in Chicago, Illinois. She and her family moved to Winnetka, Illinois after the Great Chicago Fire. And as a child, she became fascinated with the ever-changing landscape. Between that and a cousin's job as an architect, she decided to pursue a career in architecture herself. Obviously, this was a male-dominated field and just wasn't done by women, but she decided, with the encouragement of others, to go ahead and pursue architecture. She applied and was accepted to the very prestigious MIT, and though she struggled while she was there because women just weren't encouraged that much, she had people that encouraged her in her career, and she was able to finish and graduate at MIT, only the second woman to do so, in 1895. She moved back to Chicago and went to work for a small firm that had 4 or 5 other architects in it and was very successful. Her art and her watercolor designs were very popular, and I think you'd recognize some of them today, actually. One of the people that worked at that architectural firm was a man named Frank Lloyd Wright. When he moved out on his own in 1895, she was the first person that he hired to work for his architectural firm. She and a group of others had begun to help develop, including Mr. Wright, had begun to develop what we know as the Prairie style, or the Prairie School of Design. However, Mr. Wright is the one known for that because he didn't like giving credit to anyone else, and he most certainly did not like giving credit to a woman. Fortunately, today's research has found that over half of the work that Mr. Wright has in his most famous portfolio most likely belonged to Miss Marion Mahony Griffith. One architectural critic said, in fact, that she was probably the greatest of her generation, and paraphrasing what he said, he'd put her work up against anyone, anytime, including men, and she would come out ahead. Her work was never credited by Mr. Wright, and in fact, over the years that they worked together, 14 or 15 years, he never credited her, and in fact went on to make very disparaging remarks against her work and the work of her husband later on, even though they did quite well on their own. His son even at one point made it known that it was not Dad who came up with all of this stuff. In fact, he named the others who had helped develop the Prairie style and made sure that she was on that list as well. When Mr. Frank Lloyd Wright eloped to Europe later on and basically abandoned all the work that he'd been commissioned to do, it was she and some other architects who completed that work, not him. Later on, when she was hired to work for another architectural organization, she made it very clear that she would come to work only if she would not only be credited, but would have complete control over the work, which they gladly did because her work stood on its own and she was well worth it. She and her husband, who had married in 1911, she encouraged him to enter an international contest, and between his designs and her artwork, and her designs as well, I'm sure, they won first prize in this international contest. And by 1914, they were living in Australia, helping complete the work that was basically developing the new capital in Australia. While they were there, they not only oversaw that development, but she took care of all of their private commissions, and they helped develop a construction method which in the 1920s, Mr. Frank Lloyd Wright changed just enough that he called it his own once again. They also went to India to work and helped mostly develop schools, I believe. That was in 1935. Unfortunately, her beloved Walter had passed away in India in 1937, and she ended up back in Australia and then eventually back in the U.S., where she largely retired. Her work is too great to list here. Unlike Mr. Wright, whose buildings have been preserved as historical and very important, although she had done most of the designs and created a lot of things attributed to him, the works that she did on her own were not considered as important, and hardly any of her buildings exist today. There are a few around Chicago, and I think one even in Texas, but unfortunately, most of her buildings were not considered as important and were destroyed. She has buildings named after her, awards named after her, and fortunately, history has credited her, although others during her lifetime did not. The volume of works that she collected herself while she was still alive are housed at the Art Institute of Chicago and include the ones that she picked out, a volume of over 1,400 pages of her work and 650 illustrations. As of 2007, those works are available to view online as well. So although not credited during her lifetime, but fortunately credited by those who appreciated her work later, today, on day 15th of Women's History Month, we salute artist and architect Miss Marion Mahony Griffin. We salute you.